At the end of my last video, I said I had some unfinished thoughts about cancel culture, and I was thinking about making another video on the subject to express some of those thoughts. It just so happened that as I was trying to write down some of those ideas, the channel Some More News, hosted by Cody Johnston, released a video about cancel culture. For those of you who don't know, Cody is a former Cracked.com staffer, and Some More News is basically like the YouTube version of Last Week Tonight. A lot of the talking points in Cody's video lined up with the ideas I wanted to discuss, so I thought about trying something new and expressing my opinions in the form of a response. I don't really know how this will turn out, and if you guys hate it, I may never do this kind of video again, but I just wanted something to play around with while I sort out the next documentary. Anyway, Cody's video is pretty long, and it covers a wide range of people and events, but there are a few major themes that run from beginning to end, and we'll get to them as we progress through the response. The video opens up with Cody talking about the recent controversy surrounding Shane Gillis. Within a minute, Cody does this thing that I've tried and failed to find a succinct way to explain, but I've seen whenever woke scolds are criticizing somebody for comments they made on a podcast. They do this thing where they go, "Where's the joke? Where's the setup and the punchline?" Like they're completely ignorant of the podcast format. To be fair, some of these people are doing spoken bird poetry, so they may honestly not understand the concept of riffing or grasp the idea that podcasts are in most cases lightly comedic background noise. But Cody knows better. He's being willfully ignorant here, and it only continues throughout the video. One of the major themes running through this video is the idea that cancel culture, or outrage culture, is being used by famous people to make themselves appear to be the underdogs when they face criticism, particularly from marginalized groups. This lines up with the specific definition of cancel culture Cody gives in his video. He isn't talking about a bunch of people dogpiling some rando for saying dumb shit on Twitter. He's talking about famous people, comedians, entertainers, being canceled or fired from jobs or gigs because someone dug up an offensive statement or tweet or photo from their past. He also adds that he is against the idea that somebody's entire career could be ruined or ended, but luckily, that has literally never happened. The problem is Cody never really defines what famous means. He mentions individuals like Roseanne Barr, James Gunn, and Mel Gibson, whose careers have not been destroyed despite supposedly being canceled. So the implication is that he's talking about major celebrities, but at the same time, the first person he talks about in the video is Shane Gillis. Was Shane Gillis really famous before the controversy around the offensive remarks he made? Maybe it sounds like I'm splitting hairs, but the difference needs to be established, because Cody says he's against random people being dogpiled for saying something dumb on Twitter. So where is the cutoff? Cody doesn't address this, because his definition of cancel culture is arbitrarily defined to support the argument he's making, and his definition of famous is open-ended enough to fit whoever he wants. What I find intriguing is that while he's willing to talk about Shane Gillis, I don't believe he ever brings up another online content creator, which is odd, because Cody and his partner Katie Stoll have a combined 2 decades of experience making internet content just based on their work for Cracked and YouTube. They make nearly $20,000 a month from Patreon, so I have a hard time believing that they are unaware of the people who have had their YouTube or Patreon accounts banned because of offensive remarks. Maybe they have, and they think it was justified, but it would be hard for any reasonable person to deny that those people had their lives ruined or their careers ended. I imagine if the Some More News YouTube account was banned, or they lost their Patreon, Cody and Katie might feel like their lives had been ruined, or their careers ended, at least for a little while. But Cody sets a standard in this video, where somebody would need to be basically homeless and blacklisted from ever performing again for them to be considered canceled. At one point, Cody dismisses the idea that cancel culture ruined Louis C.K.'s life because he's still working despite being a literal sex offender. But his life absolutely was ruined for a time. By his own account, he lost $35 million. He also had his specials pulled from HBO, had the release of a movie canceled, and the second special in a 2-special deal with Netflix canceled. To say that his life wasn't ruined because he's trying to rebuild his career is ridiculous. It's like saying your life wasn't ruined when your house burned down because you built a new one. I'm speculating, but I imagine Louis felt like his life was ruined when he lost millions of dollars and was falsely labeled as a sex offender. Like you did, Cody, when you called him a literal sex offender, even though none of the accusations made against CK indicate that kind of behavior. Or was that just a joke? I didn't see a setup or a punchline, so by your standard I have to assume you're being serious. Maybe the joke was to segue directly from CK to Brett Kavanaugh, someone who has actually been accused of sexual assault. That way you can reinforce the idea that CK is a sex offender in much the same way that dishonest journalists link Louis CK to Harvey Weinstein. That is the problem with the definition Cody gives for cancel culture. If Louis wasn't canceled, what happened to him? Early in the video, Cody says that it seems like most of the time, cancel culture is people being mad at your shitty opinion. This statement, and others we will get to later, constitute another one of the overarching themes of the video, that cancel culture, in the scorched earth sense that Cody puts forth, doesn't really exist. So what famous people are experiencing is perfectly reasonable criticism and consequences for their actions. That people getting fired for offensive jokes or remarks is just capitalism and the entertainment industry. It's just comedy, and it's nothing new. And Cody does make a good case that of course a cowardly corporate show like SNL that never challenges the status quo is going to cave to the public outcry to fire someone like Gillis. If that was all the situation entailed, I doubt there would be so much controversy. In my experience, most people who are against cancel culture aren't mad that someone who used racial slurs on a podcast can't be a cast member of a lukewarm sketch show. What bothers a lot of people is the mentality of digging through someone's past and trying to ruin their lives because they said things you found offensive. This is a horde of people calling for blood and then gloating when they get it, and it didn't stop at getting Shane fired from SNL. As soon as he was fired, the mob was lamenting that Shane would still be able to make a living from stand-up comedy, and there is a subreddit actively trying to get the Patreon for his podcast shut down for hate speech, as well as trying to shut down the Patreon accounts of people who stood up for him, like Nick Mullen. You see something similar with Louis CK after his scandal. It wasn't enough to get all of his projects canceled and take tens of millions of dollars out of his pocket. People literally did not want him to ever be able to do stand-up again, and they fought to get events he was performing at shut down. There were even articles written calling him a workplace safety issue. And yeah, Louis will probably recover in the end. I expect to see him doing a new special for Netflix within a few years, but that doesn't make what was done to him okay. When Cody says that no one has had their life ruined, or their careers ended, I wonder if he's intentionally not talking about people like Gavin McInnes, Milo Yiannopoulos, or Alex Jones. You may hate these people. You may think that what they have said and done is vile, but they're examples of how hard you can be canceled. It doesn't stop at getting you fired. It doesn't stop at getting your Patreon shut down. If enough people send tweets and emails to the right companies, you can lose your hosting, your PayPal, your fucking bank account. You can be depersoned. It's easy to say that those guys are so bad that maybe they deserve that treatment. But do you really think as time goes by we aren't going to see more and more people treated that way? You can call it a slippery slope fallacy, but take a moment and think about how much higher on the slope we used to be. At one point, SNL aired a sketch where Chevy Chase called Richard Pryor at least half a dozen racial slurs, including the N-word. As Cody says in his video, we live in a society that progresses, and what we find socially acceptable changes with time. One of those changes he cites is that famous people are more exposed to criticism, and it's causing some of them to focus their attention on cancel culture. This is part of Cody's larger overall argument that the people who are complaining about cancel culture are famous and powerful people who don't like being criticized or facing consequences. I think Cody is partially right about this point. When you see certain comedians complaining about social justice warriors, they do just seem like out-of-touch rich guys. Because the Adam Carollas and Nick DiPaolos of the world make a very good living being conservative podcasters. If social justice warriors didn't exist, these guys would be out of a job. However, I think he kneecaps his argument pretty badly in two ways. The first is by saying that it's frustrating to see comedians like Dave Chappelle complain that PC culture is out of control and they aren't allowed to say anything they want, while literally saying anything they want on a $60 million platform on the biggest streaming service around. And that point is echoed later in the video when Cody drags Brett Kavanaugh and Trump into the conversation to make the point that cancel culture is creating a backlash to completely normal consequences, and powerful rich people who've done objectively bad things are being hailed as a hero underdog in certain corners, because they are a person who has all the power complaining about critique from marginalized groups, pretending to be the bullied while having all of the actual authority. First of all, it's obvious that Chappelle isn't and can't say whatever he wants, regardless of whether it's on a $60 million platform or not. For the number of articles criticizing Chappelle for his cruel shock value humor, I don't think he ever crossed into the territory of being cruel. His bit about the LGBTQ carpool was a pretty nuanced and accurate depiction of the real dynamics within that community.
Everybody in the car respects the T's, but everyone also resents the T's. It's not the T's' fault, but everyone in the car just feels like the T's are making the trip take longer.
And the fact that Dave didn't misgender trans people is a sign that he's not making these jokes purely for the purpose of being shocking. The truth is, Dave doesn't really have the power. He isn't someone like Brett Kavanaugh or Donald Trump, who have actual authority. Their behavior is pathetic and deplorable, but it's almost painfully clear that they were only added to the video to give some weight to the idea that these big bad famous people are pretending to be bullied while they go out and oppress marginalized groups. But realistically, what authority does a comedian like Dave Chappelle or Kevin Hart or Louis C.K. or Shane Gillis really have? When you realize that a virtually unknown writer who does spoken bird poetry can effectively get someone fired from SNL by starting a social media lynching party, it makes you really wonder who holds the power. The journalists who fuel cancel culture with deliberately dishonest articles, and the mob of social media influencers who spread the message are of the same political ideology. And this creates a system in which a small group of very loud people can almost completely control the discourse surrounding a topic. As I've stated several times in other videos, comedians like Amy Schumer and Jim Jeffries have publicly admitted to committing sexual assaults, and the stories never get picked up by the media outlets that are happy to dogpile Shane Gillis for using a slur. In a way, a comedian like Dave Chappelle is punching up when he targets cancel culture, because he is targeting the self-appointed moral arbiters who are trying to force their political opinions on an entire industry of people through strong-arm tactics and threats against their livelihood. Dave represents a group of people who no longer have a voice in the mainstream media or the world of verified social media accounts. The average person, regardless of race, gender identity, or sexual preference. The people who just want to laugh at a comedy special and are tired of being told what they're allowed to enjoy by a group of critics that are completely disconnected from the media they're criticizing. People who are only in the business so they can make the comedy world conform to their idea of right and wrong. Which is why I think Cody missed the point when he quoted George Carlin's opinion of Andrew Dice Clay punching down.
What do you think of Andrew Dice Clay? No one can talk to a comedian today and not ask an opinion about it.
You can't do an interview without it. I would defend to the death his right to do everything he does. The thing that I find unusual, and it's not a criticism so much, but his targets are underdogs. And comedy traditionally has picked on people in power, people who abuse their power. Women and gays and immigrants are kind of, to my way of thinking, underdogs.
It seems that Cody, like most people on the left these days, view power as intrinsically rich, white, straight, and male, while they can only view women and minorities as the underdogs. But if Carlin was around today, I think he would see cancel culture for what it is. A very small and very vocal group of elites who are trying to assert control over language through force.
Political correctness is America's newest form of intolerance, and it's especially pernicious because it comes disguised as tolerance. It presents itself as fairness, yet attempts to restrict and control people's language with strict codes and rigid rules. I'm not sure that's the way to fight discrimination. I'm not sure silencing people or forcing them to alter their speech is the best method for solving problems that go much deeper than speech.
I'm not a huge fan of Chris Reagan, but when he was describing the article Kotaku wrote about him, I think he hit the nail on the head when it comes to cancel culture.
And I want to be really clear about this because I think this point is pretty important, and I think it's the point that we should leave on. All we were going to do at PAX West was do our panel for the people who were excited to see us there. Nobody else. We weren't going to antagonize anybody. We weren't going to start shit. We were just going to do our show for the people who listen to our show. We were probably just going to talk about Crash Team Racing for like an hour. Literally, actually, for real. If we just had our way, nobody outside of our existing audience would have even known that we were going. And yet the simple announcement that we were going to be attending PAX, simply the announcement that we would be there at all, had people requesting things to be thrown at us if we were seen on the show floor, and people egging people on to harass us. You know, people saying, oh, fuck those guys, throw shit at them, they don't deserve the fucking platform, fucking dehumanizing us and saying all sort of stupid mean shit. But because they didn't use the word retarded or king of autism, that doesn't matter, right? That shit doesn't exist. Kotaku didn't actually care to find the people who were harassing us just for announcing that we were going to be at PAX, because that would have flown in the face of their stupid fucking Chris Reagan's audience is toxic narrative.
Cody can say that he's against some random person being dogpiled for saying something stupid on Twitter, but at the end of the day, what is the difference between some random person and a famous person? Do famous people not have emotions? Is someone like Chris Reagan supposed to not be upset when people cheer and gloat over his panel being cancelled? Is he supposed to turn the other cheek when people gleefully talk about assaulting him? This is why Cody draws the artificial distinction between random people and famous people. It's just a way of dehumanizing the people being affected by cancel culture. To frame insults, harassment, and threats as criticism. That way you don't have to feel like you're harming a real person when you get them fired over a few bad words on a podcast that you would have never heard if you didn't actively search them out. You're conditioned not even to see them as people. They're alt-right, incels, chuds, or whatever term allows you to get your social media dopamine rush and score points for the winning team without ever feeling bad about hurting a real person. As always, I want to thank you for watching the video, as well as liking, commenting, and subscribing. As I said in the beginning, this was just an experiment, and if people don't really enjoy it, I probably won't do another one. But if it's something you all liked, I might make more response videos in the future. For now though, I will be going back to my regular style of documentaries, and I have a pretty good one in mind. I would also like to thank the people who support my videos on Patreon. Thank you, BoneCK, Colin Donahue, Microballs, Alistair Kane, CP, Kevin Howard, Origami Fleshlight, Medication Doesn't Work, The Son of Man, Neem, and Jackie.